The food scarcity is real. It's going to get a lot worse. And we know as commercial buyers of food, we can tell you the supply chain is actually in a state of collapse. So take this seriously. Don't panic, but rather get prepared. I don't want people to live in fear. I want people to live in preparedness so they can live with confidence about facing an uncertain future. But this is going to be the biggest shock of our lifetimes, I believe.
Here at Liberty and Finance, we're licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. We are standing by the inventory, ready to make sure you get what you need, even into the wee hours of night and on weekends, because preparedness doesn't stop. Call us 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We have a first-time guest today. Mike Adams is the founder of healthranger.com and several other sites. He's here with us on Liberty and Finance this Tuesday, May 10th, 2022. Mike, thanks for coming on Liberty and Finance for the first time.
Well, thank you, Donegan. I'm a big fan of your channel, which is on our platform also, Brighteon, and your sons and all the work that you're doing. I really appreciate your guests. And I was blown away by your interview with the CEO of Miles Franklin the other day. So that you just have an amazing assortment of guests. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, we're fortunate. We talked a little bit about that we've been just blessed for years now to have a variety of guests who have extreme long shadows in their areas of expertise. We've had constitutional attorneys with extremely wide, deep experience and reputation. We've had Alistair McLeod, a former bank director, on regularly. Andy Schechtman, the CEO of Miles Franklin, is here for a weekly market update every Tuesday night, et cetera. And we've also had medical doctors, chiropractors, others from several different walks of life, preparedness experts. And that's why we're having you on to talk about preparedness. And I wanted to say right up front, as we do with many of our new guests, that the opinions expressed by our guests on Liberty and Finance are theirs alone and not necessarily the opinions of Liberty and Finance. So we've actually been challenged by our subscribers more often recently to bring in new voices rather than just our recurring regulars. And so we're trying to reach out and bring in additional people who've never been on our channel, but where there's a significant overlap of interest. And one of the things that I noticed that we have in common between our followers and yours are a concern for supporting the health, well-being, and security and preparedness of ordinary families. So you and I were just talking about how my wife and I homeschooled our 5 children, and how actually that led my son Elijah to found a channel which is remarkably similar and influenced my starting of Reluctant Preppers back in 2013 and has evolved into this Liberty and Finance channel. One of the things that you have created on your website are a number of infographics, and we'll put a link in the description of this video to one you did on physical preparedness for emergencies or for disaster. And I'm wondering if you could start with that and lead us into maybe what got you so interested in supporting the preparedness of families, and why at this time in particular?
Well, sure, absolutely. So my background was initially in high tech, and then I went into nutrition, and I'm a nutrition scientist. I own a laboratory. We do analysis of food, and we do a lot of manufacturing in Central Texas. We have a large, manufacturing of foods and supplements and so on. And what I began to see in this entire process was how much of the logistics infrastructure was not sustainable, and also even before recently, the creeping inflation that was happening from the money printing that continued through every administration, including Trump, including Obama, and so on. And so I became very, very concerned about where all this was headed, especially after the 2008 subprime collapse. And we saw that things almost really ended catastrophically at that point. And then you could go back to 97, long-term capital management, the very first too big to fail. So for me personally, I started buying gold and silver back in the 1990s. And then I became what you might call a hardcore prepper in terms of growing food and learning how to make your own medicine, and then getting into the technology of medicine and combining silver with herbs and things like that. I have a little bit of show and tell. I can show you some props here later on. But it became almost an obsession of how to live in a resilient fashion without relying on infrastructure, without relying on high tech, when necessary. And then now here we are entering this realm where a lot of people, especially in Western Europe, are about to get their energy cut off, and they're going to have to live as preppers. And the ministry, one of the ministries of Germany, I forgot which one, I think Ministry of the Interior, just told its citizens, be prepared for rolling blackouts. So all of a sudden, the actual nations in Europe are parroting the message that I've taught for 20 years. So here we are. Interesting.
Well, and it's only in the Biden just came out in the last month and specifically said there will be food shortages and it will be painful. So you have from officialdom, whereas it was people who were considered a bit fringe for the past decade or more who were interested in making sure that people had food security, energy security, water source figured out, I guess home protection figured out, that kind of thing. It's very strange because when I was a kid, the first thing my dad taught us, among the many, many life skills he taught us, was how to garden. That was absolutely, and when we relocated when I was 7 years old. First thing we did, put in a big garden. And he was just exclaiming about, this was near the Twin Cities in Minnesota. He was talking about the black dirt, you could go down a foot and it was still just solid black dirt. And he said, oh, this dirt is so good. Just look at this. And he was teaching us as his kids how to appreciate the living soil, how to garden. We had 2 big gardens and on it went from there. Back when I went to his dad's and mom's house, they had a garden. They had grapevines. Earlier they had a cow for milk, that sort of thing. So this was absolutely normal forever in the human experience for anyone who didn't live in maybe a big city, but even people living in big cities was fairly unusual until the last century or two. But it has become now the exception rather than the rule for people to maintain a large garden. My wife and I were just stunned when we got to the closing of the house that we currently live in, and we're handed the HOA covenant restrictions packet at closing. Here, you'll want to look at this. And one of the things in there was no gardens. And we thought, you've got to be kidding me. It's considered, an eyesore or reducing your neighbor's property value or something for you to have a food plan. And that's something that you've talked about with people, is the importance not only from a health benefit standpoint, but from a food security standpoint as well, of having a source of fresh food.
We've really advocated for the skills of learning how to grow your own food for many, many reasons. Until recently, gardening was more of an expense rather than an investment. But now with food inflation skyrocketing so quickly, remember the FAO under the UN, March, I think month over month, food inflation was 12.6%. That's in 1 month. If that continues, you double food prices in 6 months. Now, it may not continue at that pace, but food prices could easily double in the next year. So that means suddenly gardening is an investment. When you can grow red peppers or green peppers that might otherwise cost $5 or maybe coming up even $10 at the grocery store each, suddenly gardening pays off. It's kind of like mining your own sort of home grocery store, and you can actually save money with gardening. So that's a new pivot that a lot of people are getting into. Secondly, I think your listeners are aware of the nationwide shortage in infant formula, and this is due to the supply chain collapse that's happening right now. A lot of mothers can't find the infant formula that they need. And so the scarcity issue is the second but most important reason to start growing your own food. And it doesn't have to be a dirt garden. We've also talked about how to use soilless, non-electric hydroponic systems. There was a scientist named Kratky, Kratky, and he came up with a floating raft system that has since been turned into all kinds of bins. You can just go buy bins and you can make your own Kratky hydroponic systems. I do this every day. I mean, I have mounds and mounds of lettuce and fresh vegetables every day, and I put it into my smoothies here. Here's one of my green smoothies. We're blending vegetables. And then what you can do, and we've confirmed this in our food science lab, you can take ocean minerals and you feed the ocean minerals into your hydroponic water, and then you're vastly increasing the mineral content, of course, of the food that you get. So we've been able to test for zinc and magnesium, manganese, trace copper, and things like that in our lab, and just be able to confirm that you can grow your own nutritional supplements by feeding ocean minerals to your plants in your hydroponic system. So now you start to think about what are the financial benefits and the health benefits of that? It's enormous.
Back to how common sense and how formerly mainstream what we're talking about is in many ways. A lot of these traditional arts have been forgotten or laid by the wayside. But back in even as recently as World War II, there was the concept of the quote unquote victory garden, where you would increase the nation's security and your food security of your family by having a garden. And there's nothing like the taste and the nutritional quality of fresh from the garden. I mean, we had, I was just thinking most recently of 8 pots of cucumbers growing on our deck here, and being able to just go out and just pick them minutes before supper, prepare them, have them right there on the table. It's nothing like that. And kids who grow up only eating frozen, canned, processed, dried, or no vegetables, when they taste garden fresh, it's a different experience entirely. And then the simple responsibilities that they can learn of being able to have roles that are needed where they need to be needed, and they're responsible for helping take care of the garden as well, keeping that going for the family. Another thing you mentioned along the way there was, and you mentioned nursing mothers or mothers who haven't been or can't nurse and therefore have relied on infant formula. That's another example, I guess, breastfeeding of infants, of many practices that have been, I guess we're in the modern world, there's so many things that are wise and work amazingly well that have been laid by the wayside. And it's a good time for people to realize that does make us dependent on fragile supply chains, on corporate suppliers, on potentially overseas suppliers where it may be tainted. How would you know? That kind of thing. Whereas if you know the integrity of your food chain, can you talk to us a little bit about that exposure to the fragility of long supply chains? Because we've had Steve St. Angelo from the SRS Rocco report on talking about the failure of large complex societies throughout history because of their overly complex and fragile supply chains. So how are we vulnerable today in ways that have just been more recently exposed?
Well, we're seeing this. Of course, your previous guest is exactly right. Complex supply chains are highly vulnerable to systemic collapse. And we're seeing this in the food supply chain, even domestically in the United States, because of the shortage of fertilizer now and the much higher price of diesel fuel. This is only going to get far worse. So where we buy millions of pounds of food each year as part of our operation, quinoa, pinto beans, rice, all kinds of things, and microalgae, spirulina, chlorella, things like that. And where we used to be able to enter 1-year-long contracts with farmers or farmer co-ops in the United States or around the world, that ended about a year ago. On the tail end of the COVID lockdowns. And they began to say, well, we can only guarantee supplies for 90 days. And then terms started to change. This was across the board. So food purchasers who are manufacturers like we are have to pay up front. So you're not given credit terms whatsoever. It had nothing to do with us. It's an across-the-board thing. And then you're not able to get what you want. You might order, let's say, 20 pallets of something, and they'll say, well, we have 5. Do you want the 5? And then also the logistics trucking costs are significantly increased as well. But there's something else that's really important for people to understand about the supply chain. I know you'll appreciate this as someone who is health conscious. The domestic, international producers of food and spices and supplements, including China and India, they know that there are very different food standards in the United States versus the EU. The EU has very strict standards on limits of lead and heavy metals and glyphosate and pesticides. The FDA has virtually no limits in the United States whatsoever. You can't even find published limits. The USDA, under its organic program, also has no limits on heavy metals contamination of food. It's not part of the organic scope. And so what we found, because we test all the lots that we bring in, we found that international food suppliers, they test their own production. If it's too dirty for the EU, they dump it in the United States. So the U.S. actually gets food production lots, whether it's turmeric or any kind of vegetables or spices or whatever, that would be illegal to sell in the EU. So the American people are actually getting the most contaminated food of any first world countries around the world. And that's, a lot of people didn't realize that. A lot of people don't know that organic doesn't mean that it's free of heavy metals as well. So it's shocking knowledge.
Well, I didn't know that. either. I did know that over a decade, gosh, this must be 2 decades or more ago, there was a push by the big agri industry to get the FDA organic or USDA organic to embrace biosludge fertilized food, which would be like come from wastewater treatment plants, that kind of thing. So, and there was a big pushback, a grassroots effort on the part of many people who really cared about food integrity to say, no, you can't just change the reality of what something is by calling it something else. And I guess that we could segue off, but I think we shouldn't because we're talking about physical preparedness. But in the last 2 weeks here, the formation of what's been dubbed the Ministry of Truth by the current administration is that the next step in a long series of steps of trying to rebrand things by changing their name to be so that people will think about them and not realize what they really are, basically calling things the opposite of what they are. So back to physical preparedness, the items that you listed on your infographic that we're going to put a link to in the description of this video about these are items that everyone should have and not only have, but know how to use in the case of emergency. How did you prioritize that list? And are there any particular items on there you want to highlight?
Well, yes. And I really like to urge people to stock up on things that have multiple uses. And in fact, being that you're in the silver and gold industry, I've got to show you this. I brought this for you here. This is a 1 millimeter thick silver plate. And we use these to manufacture colloidal silver. And so we are one of those industrial users of silver that you hear about, everybody. We consume a lot of silver, and we actually ship it out thousands of gallons a month in different products, in different liquids. But what people need to realize is that by stockpiling silver coins, you also have the potential to make your own topical antiseptic substances that can be used very simply. You can use 3 9-volt batteries and 2 silver coins. And you can make your own colloidal silver solution quite simply, which can be used topically. I'm not suggesting internal use, but topically, you can blend it with xanthan gum. You can make a first aid gel. And it's very, very effective. In fact, we have done an analysis of the mineral content of what happens if you take 2 U.S. Silver coins, silver eagles from the U.S. Mint, and you make colloidal silver out of them. We know how much zinc is in the final solution, how much silver, how much copper, how much of everything, and it's almost all silver. So it's the perfect solution. It's just that many people don't realize that silver is used in medicine as well. And in fact, there's a study here that I wanted to mention. It's called the synthesis, stabilization, and surface modification of gold and silver nanoparticles by rosmarinic acid and its analogs. This is part of what's called green chemistry, where in very advanced medical research, they're using silver nanoparticles with extracts of certain herbs, such as rosemary. And I actually brought a sample of it here. This is actually rosmarinic acid made by using an ultrasonic extraction of rosemary herb combined with colloidal silver. So these are silver nanoparticles, which is being used in modern medicine for research. And I don't sell this or anything. I'm not trying to plug something commercially. I'm just talking about the state of the art of technology because they're doing cancer research. Can silver ions be donated to certain tissues and certain organs through this research? Could that have potential long term as actual medicine? So I just want people to understand silver is more than just a store of value. It's more than just money. It's also medicine. And when you store silver, you're storing both of those properties.
I can add a personal anecdote to your story about rosmarinic acid and silver nanoparticles because my wife and I are long-term Lyme survivors. I contracted Lyme disease while playing paintball in the woods in western Wisconsin. I had an embedded deer tick, and I came down hard with Lyme. I thought I was a 90-year-old man. It was just terrible, and we got treated. And then we found out later or I got treated, and we found out later that my rebound. Then I started getting these mysterious symptoms over the next several years, and it was like whack-a-mole. It's like, what is connecting the dots between all these symptoms? It turns out I had chronic long-term Lyme. Then my wife started having symptoms. We thought, what the heck? She wasn't out there in the woods with me. And then that's where we found out what they don't tell you is that partners can pass that to each other. And then we got treated through this natural or holistic integrative doc, and that included rosmarinic acid because the Lyme can cover themselves with this biofilm. It helps to remove the biofilm so that your immune system can recognize and mount a counterattack. He also recommended colloidal silver nanoparticles, so we took that as well. Had no idea that they might be synergistic. I don't know if he did either, but perhaps we just stumbled on something. But that was interesting to hear the corroboration of what you said this latest research is looking into.
Well, they are, and what we were able to replicate this in our own laboratory. It's so simple. I try to teach people really simple, low-cost ways to do amazing things with common substances. So you can even go online. You can buy an ultrasonic jewelry cleaner for $30 or something, and you can put rosemary in it, some rosemary herb, and you can put 50% vodka, 50% water. Run that for one cycle. You've just done an herbal extract. And you can take that extract, you combine it with colloidal silver, and you've just made rosmarinic acid silver nanoparticles that are used in this research. Now, what can you do with that? Well, that's up to the research. They're still working on that. But you can make medicine using low-tech systems, and silver has applications way beyond. I mean, most of your guests are talking about, the asset class, which is crucial, but it goes way beyond the asset class. When you're storing silver, you're storing potential for all kinds of amazing things, including, again, topical antiseptics that you can make yourself. It's like compressed medicine. Just add water, and then you have something that's actually very practical in a survival situation.
In addition to silver, as you described, what other things rise to the top of your list on your infographic about things that you should not only have, but know how to use in case of an emergency?
Well, backup communications is really critical, in my opinion. Includes having local radios so you can communicate with family members, or you can communicate from your house out to someone who might be working outside for security purposes, but also knowing how to use shortwave radios or being a ham radio operator. It's pretty easy to get a ham license, although I haven't done it yet myself. But having backup comms is going to be absolutely critical. We can't trust that the cellular data grid is going to function well. A little over a year ago in Texas, we had the big freeze and everything went down. The power grid was down. We had rolling blackouts for days. The cell towers didn't work at all. And that was a big wake-up call for Texans. But the same truth should apply everywhere, all around the world.
Part of communications, as you're describing, is being able to reach out to each other. I've heard that it's equally important to have talked through in advance plans and scenarios so that if you need to activate a plan or agree to meet at a meeting point or whatever, you don't have to figure that all out in the heat of the moment when everybody's stressed, but you actually have thought through. Can you talk about those non-physical preparedness steps?
Yeah, I consider that to be your social preparedness, or having understanding among your family or people who plan to join you. Now, I hear from a lot of people who have places in more rural areas. I live on a ranch in Texas. I live out in the country with backyard chickens and goats and things like that. People in our situation, we will end up hosting a lot of people, refugees, fleeing the cities if there is some kind of a World War III scenario, which could happen, or an EMP attack, which is potentially in the works. Or, think about what's happening with Russia right now and how that's escalating very rapidly. So those of us in the country are going to end up with a lot more people coming to us. And it's important, as you said, Dunnigan, to have an advanced communication, an understanding with those people on a couple of things. Like, number one, if you come out, bring stuff with you, because you're going to need to contribute to the ability for all of us to survive. And then secondly, be willing to learn and be willing to work. Growing food takes work. Doing security takes work. Building shelter, maintaining systems. And if we don't have electricity for some period of time, it's going to take an awful lot of work. You're going to be moving water, harvesting water, filtering water, taking care of animals. You're going to be harvesting food, preparing food. It is a full-time job, as our grandparents or great-grandparents can certainly attest to. They survived, though, and we can too, if we're willing to have the knowledge and face the reality of what's happening.
Water is one of those things that's so critically high on the priority scale just because of our intense dependence on it on a continual basis, day by day, for survival. Can you talk to us about what you think are some of the most important considerations to have plans around when it comes to water?
Yeah, absolutely. So the the best quality water that you can get is rainwater, bar none. And we've done the tests in our lab. We tested over 600 well water and municipal water samples from around the country a few years ago. And we found well water is very contaminated because groundwater is contaminated. Municipal water is, of course, highly contaminated. Some of it's recycled wastewater that just goes through filtration. Then they blast it with chlorine to try to kill anything that might wiggle. But rainwater is distilled water. And it's the best water for plants. It's the best water for you. So what we strongly recommend is rainwater collection if you live in an area that has sufficient rainfall, how many inches per year. And then you're going to need a filtration system and typically a UV light bulb that filters the water as it passes through. So you need particulate filtration, UV light filtration, and then you have the perfect drinking water. And I've lived on that water for now more than, I think, 12 years, and it's truly the best water for everything. If you don't have that, surface water is the next best water, better than well water. So pond water, you can harvest that, and then you're going to need very good filtration systems, obviously, to remove, the giardia or whatever else might be in that water. But I would rather consume surface water than well water, and surface water has fewer minerals in it by far, and the pH is better for our health as well.
It's interesting you mentioned the concerns around well water because it's a reasonable assumption people have that pulling water up from a well, and there are some fairly famous, deep wells and sheltered aquifers in certain parts of the country that actually are well known for having excellent water quality. But just because some places do doesn't mean all places do, and especially if it's in an area that either has had industrial or highly urban or highly concentrated agriculture, that kind of thing. We had a very close family acquaintance whose daughter was getting her teenage daughter getting a lot of medical visits to doctors for all kinds of strange symptoms that they could not figure out. Then the mom started getting sick. Then the brother started getting sick. And the dad was doing this extreme commuting for hours, and he was driving across the state to his office and kind of praying and then arguing with God and saying, it's like somebody's trying to poison my family. And all of a sudden a light bulb went on for him. My family is being poisoned. And it turned out this lovely 57-acre family farm that he had inherited from his dad, where they had raised dairy, cattle, and other animals, that their well had nitrates and all kinds of things in there from agricultural seepage that went down and got into the aquifer. And so it is a very serious concern.
And well water, as you said, you're exactly right. Depends on what aquifer you're tapping into. But most of the aquifers in the continental United States and around the world are quite heavily contaminated with agricultural runoff as well as industrial chemicals. And remember, these aquifers can span multiple states. So the water is, in essence, shared, and any polluter in any area can then contaminate that entire aquifer. And the other thing that people need to realize is that your normal water filtration, your home water filter, absolutely may not remove many of the agricultural or industrial chemicals. For example, glyphosate, the herbicide chemical that's used on crops, Roundup Ready crops, that molecule is very small and it penetrates almost everything. It goes right through typical carbon block filters. So if you don't want to be drinking glyphosate, it's better to have a water source that can't possibly have that molecule in it in the first place, and that's rainwater. So I always recommend people, wherever you go, build a barn and have a metal roof for the barn, and then start collecting rainwater off of that barn. Even with the metal roof, it doesn't really matter. We've done the test. The metal roof doesn't contaminate the water at all. The water is going to be the cleanest water for multiple purposes, again, for you, for your animals, and for your plants as well. And if you can't do that, then you need to, I believe, upgrade your water filtration system into something far more robust with multiple filtration media layers, such as KDF, for example, not just carbon block. And maybe for drinking, just drink distilled water only. And then take your minerals through your vegetables. Remember what I said, add sea minerals to your vegetables that you're growing. Get your minerals in a bioavailable format that's in the plants. So that's what your body is expecting. And all plants are calcium and magnesium supplements because they use tremendous amounts of calcium and magnesium in order to survive. So you don't need to take calcium supplements. All you need to do is grow plants using minerals, and that's your calcium supplement right there.
I can see where, as you point out, rainwater comes from a distillation process and then it returns to earth. But in many areas, again, there may not be an ideal environment if people live near a refinery or a manufacturing plant or something where they spray the crops or whatever. I know we were driving through the San Bernardino Valley in California, going from LA to Yosemite, and it was just horrifying how many of these crop dusting planes were like going right over our car, like hold your breath, And anyway, so I know those are very specific events that occur, and hopefully that stuff settles out. Or I know in the Phoenix area or around southern Arizona, there can be windstorms that can blow up desert dust. With there's a mold in there that causes valley fever or whatever. So I suppose that there are times when the rainwater that's collected would be purer than other times. Any suggestions for people around that aspect of the actual purity of their rainwater?
Thank you for bringing that up. That's a really important point. So most rainwater collection systems actually discard the first X number of gallons that come off of a roof, because that roof might have dust, it might have, bird poo on it or whatever, leaves, whatever. Yeah, anything. So normally there's a washout that is some, maybe 100 gallons or something, depending on how big your roof is. And then only the water after that continues on into your water collection tank. And that also keeps your tank cleaner as well. So you're exactly right. Whatever is in that first wave of water is going to get discarded.
I used to work for a solar engineering company, and that's one of the things when you look at the charts of performance of a solar field, a large solar installation, it slowly goes down. All of a sudden it goes way better. And what happened there? They said, well, there was a rain event and it washed off all that accumulated dust off all the panels. Now we have better transmission. In addition to water, one more thing we would have time for, if you want to pick one more thing off the list that people will find on your emergency preparedness list, in addition to water.
Well, yeah, I want to mention that in a collapse scenario, and I specialize in teaching people how to survive that, right? Most people actually die from disease and infections and cholera and poor sanitation. So when cities cease to function, and this is true throughout the history of the world, when cities cease to function, people die from preventable diseases, from coming into contact with untreated waste or untreated water and things like that. So it's absolutely critical to be able to have sanitizers. And so I always encourage people to stock up on povidone iodine, hydrogen peroxide, isopropyl alcohol, and then also things that you can ingest internally that can treat food poisoning. There are oregano oils. Some people like to stock up on antibiotics that are prescription, but you need to know the safety margins of how to use those well, because they can be quite fatal if you overdose or if you give a child the wrong dose. So do your research on that. But you need to think about the fact that when your toilets work and when running water works, life can be pretty clean and it's pretty easy. When those things stop working, suddenly you are actually surrounded by a lot of filth and a lot of bacteria, a lot of potential viruses, and life can get very deadly very quickly. You can die from a common scratch, which would typically just be treated with just run-of-the-mill antibiotics at a local clinic. So keep all these things in mind. This, again, coming back to silver, this is why I recommend people also have silver and understand how to make your own colloidal silver at home, because you're storing money in the form of the silver, but it's also storing medicine if you ever need to turn it into medicine. You can't lose. I mean, it's win-win. I mean, silver, I like silver a lot more than gold for that very reason, because it has all these amazing purposes, but that's just me.
Mike, for people who want to dig further into the writing, the publishing, the videos, and so on that you've created, and other infographics you have as well, where should they go?
Well, naturalnews.com is where I write articles. And of course, I'm the founder of Brighteon.com, which is a YouTube alternative free speech video website. And Liberty and Finance has a very prominent channel there that's very popular. And that's where I watch all of your videos too. So thank you for using the platform. We built it so that we can all speak freely. Any
final thoughts that you'd like to suggest to families who are concerned about the changes that are happening right now and how they can make their families more resilient, more prepared for what's coming?
Yeah, I guess the final thought is that, kind of as you hinted, Dunnigan, the things that I'm saying now, even just 4 years ago, they were considered quite fringe. Not so much anymore. The food scarcity is real. It's going to get a lot worse. And we know as commercial buyers of food, we can tell you the supply chain is actually in a state of collapse. So take this seriously. Don't panic, but rather get prepared. I don't want people to live in fear. I want people to live in preparedness so they can live with confidence about facing an uncertain future. But this is going to be the biggest shock of our lifetimes, I believe, and it's going to last several years. So get prepared now, and you'll be squared away.
We've been speaking with Mike Adams. He's not only co-founder of Brighteon, but also of the healthranger.com and naturalnews.com. Mike, thanks for joining us on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you so much, Donegan. Take care.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we will let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be double boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Elijah, my brother Kaiser, or my father Donegan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.